Max Hooper for Morton, an engineer with a vision for Australia. Coming up on Citizens Insight. Welcome to Citizens Insight, the Citizens Party's interview series on matters of national and international importance. And because it's an election year, 2025 federal election coming up, our interview series on leading Citizens Party candidates for this election. And my guest today is the one and only Max Hooper, our candidate for Morton in Queensland. Welcome, Max.
Thanks, Robbie. Great to be here.
Great to have you. We've been talking about doing this for a long time.
Yeah, we have.
You're a man of ideas and you've been wanting to get the ideas out there, and now we've got an election campaign and it's the perfect time to do it.
What better opportunity?
Oh, exactly. All right, Max, well, we're going to try and keep this below an hour. I always say that. Let's see how we go. So let's get straight into it. Let's introduce yourself first with your background and also tell us a bit about your political experience.
Thanks, Robbie. So my background is, I'm actually not a professional politician, so I've never run for before. This is my first time.
Which is why we headhunted you.
Yes.
Well, the professionals are the disasters, mate.
They are, yeah. I've had a bit of experience with them. So my background, I'm actually an engineer, like a civil engineer. So my interest in politics doesn't really come from playing the political games. I was never in student politics or anything like that. They used to come into our lecture rooms during the elections with engineers. None of the engineers tended to be politicians.
Right.
So we just used to sort of think, oh, here we go.
Yeah.
My interest in politics really came from my interest in infrastructure. And I think that Australia's lacks a good infrastructure vision. And that's what really got me into politics. I've actually come through another party, so I actually was...
You can name and shame them.
I was a member of the Australian Labor Party.
Boo.
Generally,
see, Labor, this is the state of Labor. When you lose a quality guy like this, that tells you everything you need to know about the Labor Party.
Yeah. So what got me into politics was in our local electorate of Morton. I live near a very dangerous level crossing.
Right.
And Labor politicians of various stripes for many years, going back as long as 1974, had been talking about removing this level crossing.
Right.
It's still not done, by the way. So the state government came in 2015 and said, our number one priority is going to be to remove the Coopers Plains level crossing. And 4 years later, 2019, federal election, they said, if you really want this level crossing removed, you've got to support your Labor candidate. So yeah. I said, right, I've got to get in there. This needs to get done. I'm going to join the Labor Party.
Right.
Right. So that's what got me into politics. It was quite frustrating actually because it's still not fixed 6 years later. So what I really got when I joined the Labor Party was a bit of an insight into why things don't happen in this country. And it's just a lot of talking. It's these projects are raised as kind of, I guess, catalysts to try to get people to join the party rather than just get on with the job.
So they can talk a good game for elections. And we're seeing it now. Suddenly Albanese, who's been in government for 3 years, has all these promises, elect me, re-elect me, and I'll do this. And you think, well, you're making everything sound so important. Why haven't you already done it?
Yeah, well, I just got involved because I said, this needs to get done. And if I, as a local resident, if I can help them get elected, it'll get done. They did get elected. Eventually, they didn't win that election. That was the Bill Shorten election. But it's still not done. And it's basically, I got a really good insight into the way the major parties politicise infrastructure. They argue about it. They argue between Labor and Liberal.
Yep.
They have their pet projects. And then you've got state, federal and council. And it just becomes a political football. And unfortunately, it makes you pretty cynical.
No doubt.
But
well, you've just made me a bit more cynical because a couple of years ago you drove me around your electorate and showed me this level crossing.
Yep.
And it's still not built. And I think, just a quick diversion here, on that drive, we were talking about the contrast with Victoria because now this might be some challenging for some of the viewers, but I did try and explain to people for a long time who couldn't understand why Dan Andrews kept getting elected, that, well, the Dan Andrews you see who you think is a is a real obnoxious personality, a tyrant. The tyrant Dan Andrews, that's not the whole picture, because he did something that's quite unusual in Australian politics in terms of the last few decades. He promised to fix level crossings, and he over-delivered.
And he did it.
Right? And everyone knows, like, this was a big, now people would say, oh yeah, but Victoria's got so much debt, etc., from all these infrastructure projects. Well, that's a separate thing, and the Citizens Party would have dealt with that separately. But it was unusual to finally see someone go and deliver on infrastructure. And I think that's why the Australian people, or the Victorian people, cut him so much slack when he was also locking us up for the longest lockdowns, etc.
Yes.
Those things made a difference. Because what you're describing is much more normal for Australian politics.
Yeah, the actual idea of actually following through.
Yeah.
And that's why, like I know the residents of Coopers Plains pretty well. That's my suburb, and you know, they're all very cynical now. They're like, this is never going to happen. Like, I actually think it is going to happen now. I think the shops are about to be evicted in March, and they're about to start construction. And I mean, you'd be a cynical person, but you could say that might be because there's an election the month after.
Yeah, of course.
But it probably is going to happen eventually. But you know, this is 10 years down the track, and
it's poor.
Queensland announced a program of level crossing removals in 2015. We're now in 2025. They're out of office. They haven't actually finished one yet. And I think the number in Victoria, you could correct me, but I think it's about 60 odd, isn't it? Or
over 60.
Right. So, so I mean,
and anyway, you know, I'm not trying to tell people to like Dan Andrews, but every Melburnian acknowledges every single level crossing removal made an enormous difference.
Yeah, and I guess the point I'd make is that it's not about, most people aren't into politics, right?
No.
It turns them off, and what they are into is leadership. So if someone comes in and says they're going to do something and they deliver it, then you got to take your hat off to them. Yeah.
Well, speaking of leadership, why did you decide to run for the Citizens Party?
Right. Okay. So I did have quite a few issues with the Labor Party. My frustration did build up. I do remember being a young uni student about 2001. It was around about the time September 11, and there was the Iraq War and the build up to that. Used to be called the Citizens Electoral Council, and I remember I didn't know who they were. I was like, who are these people, you know? And I think I'm now trying to run for election, and we'll have to start off with the first thing is, have you heard of us? Because you've got to break that first barrier. But I remember getting a leaflet documentation, and it was all about the history of banking and great infrastructure projects and vision for the country, and you know, a principled opposition to the Iraq War. And I was like, you know, I don't know who these guys are. Like, with the Citizens Electoral Council, I thought they might have been part of the Electoral Commission, like not actually a party, but they might have been like a government department, you know.
Informing the public
altruistically. It was very, very well researched, and I always had that kind of, you know, old Labor bent, and a lot of it I agreed with, and I actually went on from that point, didn't know they were a party, and I think it was I was already pretty much ready to throw my lot in with Labor. It was a bad experience, and we won't go down into the weeds there, but I think I saw you I watch a lot of YouTube and get a lot of news, and I think I saw you do an interview with Martin North on DFA.
Oh, yeah.
And just the passion you had, you know, and the research that went into it, and then I put the two and two together. I go, these are those people, and I was like,
okay.
I said, we need people like that, like, we need people like Robbie elected to Parliament, because I was like, this guy's talking a lot of sense. And I then did a bit of research. I downloaded the infrastructure blueprint for the nation. I used to work with Lance Endersby, who
Professor Lance Endersby. Yep.
Talked about a national ring railroad. I think it talked about our opportunities with Southeast Asia opening up, new markets, infrastructure to get our products to the market. Our prosperity was going to be linked to trade. He had a full infrastructure plan with rail and hydropower to back that up. And I thought, well, I thought that's pretty good. I was in the infrastructure politics because of infrastructure. Thought these guys sound pretty good to me. So
if viewers are interested in what you've just had to say, then you can contact the party and ask for this information, because it is there available. Professor Endersby, I got to talk to him in the mid-90s, the first time I spoke to him. And he said something that blew me away, because he's a retired man by that time. but he said that he assessed his investments based on which countries had the fastest rising consumption of electricity.
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
That's how he measured growth.
Yeah,
right?
I remember
physical growth.
I watched his talk, and it's actually true. Like you can graph GDP, and you can graph energy consumption.
Yeah.
And I think like really like we've lost the plot here in Australia. Like I think we're really in managed decline. Like it's unfortunate, but that's what the main political class seems to be. Like all the talk is about we've got to shrink our footprint, we've got to shrink down.
Yep. Yep.
You know, that's not true. Like I mean, we need clean energy. We definitely need clean energy. Like we don't want to be polluting the environment, but our quality of life is linked to hard things like infrastructure, energy, and so we need a real plan for that, basically. Yeah.
No, exactly. Well, in a little bit, we'll talk a bit more about that because you've got some good ideas. But before we do, so you're running for the seat of Morton in Brisbane. So tell us what your electorate looks like.
Okay, so Morton's I'm pretty biased, Robbie, because I live there.
Right.
So Morton's a great electorate, I think. Like it's a real powerhouse of Brisbane. So on the western side of Morton, you've got the Archfield Aerodrome, and you've got it's called the Golden Triangle of industrial land. So my family, I've lived in Morton for about 13, 14 years, but I built a house there, but my family history goes back. My grandfather actually shipped out to Papua New Guinea from Archfield Airfield. Oh, okay. And then he raised family like my mother and my uncle in veterans housing there. So on the western part of Morton, you've got Archfield Aerodrome. On the eastern side, you've got the Southeast Freeway. You've got a heavy rail line right through the middle. You've got the Acacia Ridge Intermodal, which is a really critical freight facility. And then you've got Sunnybank. You've got a very large Chinese population. Morton's actually I think it is the most multicultural electorate in Queensland. Right. So there's such a rich tapestry of people that have really contributed to Morton. Like right in the heart of Morton, you've got Sunnybank. You've got a place called Market Square. People who live in Morton will know it really well. Yeah. You can go any time of the night and get any cuisine from any part of Asia you want in the world. It's great. Right. And then you got Mount Gravatt Garden City, which was originally going to be a southern hub for the city. And there you've got like lots of different kind of groups popping up, and you know, it's a rich tapestry of socially and ethnically. I think it's almost got 50% of people that speak English as a second language. Right. In the home. I can't remember the stats, but it's quite high. That is high. Right. So for Morton, I think with the right policies and the right government, Morton would be just an absolute booming place for small business. You've got the restaurant sector, you've got real estate investment, and then you've also got the industrial, the warehousing and the freight. If we can pull all that together, and with the people we've got and the diversity we've got, we could be one of the best places in Brisbane, really. Yeah. Well, just outline for us then, in terms of your electorate of Morton, the importance of infrastructure policy. Okay, yeah. So one of the big, so infrastructure comes into play quite a lot. And probably the single biggest thing that I sort of took a focus on was Inland Rail. And we can talk about this later. Inland Rail is a very flawed project in terms of how it's conceived. Yeah. And there's a lot of factors in that. It's different levels of government and everything. But the current project they're talking about will have Inland Rail terminating at Acacia Ridge Intermodal, which is right in the middle of about a kilometre from where I live. And you've got two big centres at Sunnybank and Mount Gravatt that have the potential to be an urban CBD. Like in Sydney, they've got a 3 CBD plan. So Westfield, that's at Garden City, part of the planning was to have a southern CBD and a northern CBD. So right in the heart of this multicultural community, with all of this investment, there's people wanting to build hotels, there's entertainment, you're going to have a massive truck sewer on the road running right through the middle of it, because you're going to have all of the freight of the nation pumping into Acacia Ridge and unloading onto trucks and driving right through the middle of that.
Right.
So I'd probably say that's probably the biggest
Yeah.
the biggest issue, I'd say, for infrastructure. We also have...
Because we'll talk about it more in a minute, but there's a much better alternative
Oh, there is, yeah.
for the inland rail than dumping it in this middle of this urban area.
Yeah, right. So that's a significant issue that has a potential to greatly decrease the quality of life in Morton.
Yeah.
The other thing is we have the heavy rail corridor and we have the Brisbane Metro on either sides of the electorate. And part of my vision as a candidate for Morton, as a civil engineer, I've got interest in transport. And if we can deal with that truck problem, which is linked to inland rail, my vision would be to get a lot of cross-connecting services and knit the suburbs together. And we could build like I would call it Brisbane's version of Parramatta, like a cohesive CBD with a good urban core and everyone can get around locally. So my vision for Morton is not everyone going back up to the CBD and the centre of the city. My vision's like a suburban city,
Right.
where everyone links together across the electorate. Yeah.
Yeah, and again, when we drove around a couple of years ago, you showed me these roads that these trucks will be on. And I can tell you, viewers, you don't want
They're not highways,
thousands
are they?
of trucks
No.
on these roads.
No.
This is just be crazy
There's
stuff.
houses right up against the
the
road. So,
yeah. So let's talk about more of that in a minute, of course, in terms of inland rail. So sticking with your electorate though, which of the Citizens Party's policies do you think are the most urgent for Morton?
Yeah.
Most applicable?
Well, I think I ran a small business for a while. I'm not running it now. I'm employed, but I know the challenges of small business.
Yeah.
And from what I hear from a lot of small business owners is it's not actually that easy to get credit.
No.
So unfortunately, we can talk a bit more about this in detail, but our economy really is not a productive economy anymore. I think I heard a statistic that I think it was Senate estimates, might have been Andrew Bragg, and he was interviewing the Productivity Commission, and they said since COVID, 83% of the jobs that have been created are what they call non-market jobs.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
Government service jobs.
So some of these
government service jobs.
So some of these jobs are important. So like, but you got large bureaucracies building. I've worked a bit in local government before as well, and
But it mainly means the private sector isn't booming.
Yeah, and I mean, I just talked about Morton before, and I think Morton, our prosperity would really be like down to the small business level. That's the real engines for prosperity in Australia. I'd say, like, you look at our economy at the moment, and you know, some of the things from the Labor Days and the things they focus on, you know, our universal health care and our education, they're very important. You know, we should definitely have that. And the NDIS, very important. I just worry that the way our economy is structured, we're going to get to a crunch point. Potentially a Conservative government's going to come in and say, we can't afford these.
Yeah, yeah.
And the thing is, the vision of a productive economy and the physical economy, that's really the heart of the Citizens Party. I think we have the answers to provide. I don't think the major parties do at the moment.
No.
I think, like I said, it's really managed decline. And I'd say using Morton as a small melting pot for the nation as a whole, if we get those small businesses and all of those entrepreneurial people and the big businesses, the warehousing, the trucking, and we get all of that right, we will prosper. And it's that, I would call it productivity, that guarantees those other services that we enjoy. And I just worry at the moment we don't really have an economy structured that's going to support that for the long term. No,
we don't. So what you're specifically talking about is the ability of a public bank that we advocate as a post office bank to give credit to the small businesses that are right now starved of credit.
Yeah.
The only way a small business can get loans nowadays, if they put up their house, and so they have to risk everything in their life in order to be entrepreneurial and start a business. Didn't used to be that way. Whereas a public bank that has the people's savings in it, has flexibility to make those loans, assess those loans on their merit, saying, okay, that's a good business idea, we'll back it. We used to have the Commonwealth Development Bank do this before we privatised it with the Commonwealth Bank. And if you start doing that, you can really unleash the small business sector.
That's exactly right. I didn't touch on the the bank, but really that's at the heart of it, because people need to understand that one of the most important, like infrastructure is very important, and I think we're about to talk about that.
Yeah.
But the most important thing in the country is who controls the supply of money and credit, right? And that's where the real power is in the economy. And I think in Australia, small business and the taxpayer, like just the ordinary working person, is bearing a lot of the load of the tax to support services and a expanding government sector. Now, Citizens Party is definitely not a small government party.
No.
But we're a smart government party. We need smart government.
Good line.
Yeah.
We just coined a new slogan.
Exactly. What we need is a government structured in such a way that things are done more efficiently, there's less barriers to people doing things, but it supports the ordinary person. I think we've lost sight of that now, and I think that's what we need to get back to.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I think the bank's part of that. I think also having a bit of vision and for the infrastructure, which we can talk about, is pretty critical.
And infrastructure, as we know, is so crucial to productivity.
It is, 100%.
You're not going to get productivity increases without it.
No, that's right.
The last candidate to sit where you are was Professor Andy Schmulo, the Senate candidate for New South Wales. If we got him into the Senate, he would be going after the side of the economic equation where everything is rigged against small business by big business.
Well, actually, Andy's a great character. I mean, you just had to see the video the other day. A few F-bombs in there, but, I applaud it. I think a lot of people would if they actually watched him, because, the average person's not obsessed with politics, like I said, but they're smart enough to figure out that the game's pretty rigged, right?
Yeah.
And here you got this guy coming in and he's putting it right. No one can really articulate it, but no one can articulate it like Andy does.
Not like he does, exactly.
And I think that's actually the other part of it. To bring me back to Morton and what's impediments and things, is there is corruption creeping into Australia. And our government departments, I think, I saw this working in council. We talk about skill shortages, the things that are going to come up later, but we've seen a massive expansion of what I would call like executive level appointees into government.
Right.
And I'd really question if that adds a lot of value. I've seen.
You mean overpaid, useless eaters at the top?
Yeah, right.
That's what you're talking about.
Yeah. So we have a housing crisis. So what's the solution? Let's get like 30 really high paid people on almost $1 million a year to sit around a table and talk about it.
Yeah.
That
is Australia.
We don't need that. We need a person who's let's call them the boss. Let's strip it back, go back to old school. One person that's accountable, because I've watched a lot of these Senate estimates. I know you've been involved, and you've got these high paid people sitting around the table, and they're just pointing the fingers. Was that you? Was that? And I just think we have too many departments. I think we need a department of infrastructure that's all it does, and there needs to be a person at the top that's accountable. So I think we need to strip back the executive, and we need to put all of our focus back into the people that do stuff, the doers at the bottom.
100%.
Yeah.
And the people at the top, by the way, if the public needs something to get angry at, so many of these secretaries of these federal departments now are on $1 million a year.
Yeah, they're paid more than the Prime Minister.
Twice as much as the Prime Minister.
And
right?
I mean, I'm an engineer, and like every hour we spend, we have to justify it on a timesheet to be recovered against a fee to the client.
Let's see how that would work.
I sometimes think to myself, geez, it'd be lovely to be sitting there, like, don't have to justify anything, and then like I always add the numbers up in my head, and I'm like, how does that work? Like, what value are you adding?
Sorry to digress here, but I just want to mention a quick story, because what you were just saying reminded me of an opposite example of something that when Franklin Roosevelt took office as president in 1933, in the middle of the Depression, and he launched the New Deal. One of the big things was employment, right? Unemployment. So he appointed people to run this program to get people into jobs, just get them working, right? Yeah. And the secretary.
It's not rocket science.
The secretary of the woman he appointed as the secretary of the department She set up a card table in the town hall in New York, right? And here, line up and sign up.
Yep.
Bang, bang, bang. There's your job.
Yep.
You know,
Learn it, and the other thing
just
too
do
is
it.
learn it on the job.
Exactly.
Like you need all of these pieces of paper now just to get a cadetship.
Yeah.
And those kids should be just. The government has all this work it needs to do. Yes, there's a skill shortage now, but just get them out of school. As long as they know Year 10 English, you can teach them on the job. You know.
Well, there you go. Good insight.
Yeah.
Well, that brings us to how can we ease the so-called skills shortage?
Yeah, so I've got a few ideas about this. You have a young generation now they're getting saddled with a lot of student debt.
Yeah.
And everyone seems to want jobs like sort of operational job, or the office jobs in the public sector.
That's what they've been conditioned to aspire to.
Yeah, that's because it's not their fault.
No.
That's come from Keating.
Yeah.
Keating decided, revolutionised the economy. He said, we're not going to be like a producer anymore, we're going to be a services economy. We're going to be the Venice of Australia.
That's right, the Venice of the world, the Antipodean Venice. He made it sound like factory workers had a hard life, and he was going to liberate them from the factory and give them jobs in the services sector, where they'd have to retrain about a dozen times in their working life.
And I think that created like a professional kind of education industry.
Yeah.
So rather than universities just being there to, to follow your passions and things like that, like you get recycled through the system. We don't have a Commonwealth employment service anymore. You get these private job providers, and people will know this. People I've been lucky. I've been in work most of my career, but there's a lot of very highly trained people that are out of work because there's a scarcity. Because the economy requires some of these jobs, but it only requires so many. And then there's all of these other jobs that are unfilled. So part of me thinks the skills crisis is actually a bit manufactured, and I question how much it actually exists. I think we just have people trained for the wrong jobs.
Right.
They're trained for the jobs there's a scarcity in, and they're not going into the jobs that we need. So I think we can address a lot of the skills crisis by focusing on the TAFE sector. Mm-hmm. The biggest shortage we've got is tradies. If we want to build houses, we're not going to build houses with people in suits sitting around tables. And we can talk. But they're going to be built by people swinging a hammer, knocking a drill, having a shovel, digging it out. I think we've got a bit of a sense of unreality in the market. And yes, we're going to need some people from overseas to help. And we've got, in Morton, we've actually got a history of that because we had the post-World War II housing boom, and we got new influxes into Morton. And because the economic need lined up with the people coming in, it wasn't a problem, it was smooth. But these days, I think it's just a bit jarring because the economy's not working. And I think if the economy works, it's never been an issue, like things like intakes to Australia, immigration, things like that. But economy's pretty clearly not working.
Well, can I explain something actually? Because this goes to the heart of why the Citizens Party models ourselves in many ways on the old Labor Party. And we've just talked about Paul Keating as an example of what the new Labor Party has become. And they adopted this neoliberal idea that let the market figure this sort of stuff out. And of course it doesn't.
Yep.
So the trick is then to use immigration as this way of creating, increasing market demand.
Yep.
Hopefully that will then prompt the process along, but it's still the market has to figure it out by itself, just based on the extra demand brought in by immigration. Yeah. And it doesn't.
Yeah, it doesn't do it on its own. Yeah, I think
our party. I haven't done exactly the maths, but our party could probably safely double immigration to Australia, but in a way where we literally distribute it across the whole country, including regional Australia, and no one city or town would notice the difference. Yeah. Right? What we've got instead is immigration that's crammed into three cities.
Poured into Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane.
Right? Yeah. And everyone sees the burden on the infrastructure. Yeah. And then, of course, political charlatans come along and they try and get people to blame the the new immigrant.
Yeah,
And that's
it's not the fault of the
It's
individual.
not their fault at all. This is the broken political system. So, and that comes down to always the vision for infrastructure, and that you definitely are a man with vision, Max. So you've thought long and hard about this infrastructure question. So I
might just quickly touch on those couple of things you said. So I think the current approach to it, and why people are able to get this traction at the moment, is because there isn't the plan to go with it. And so all it does is it cycles through, it creates its own problems. You get the people, they need houses, bang, round the circle, they go, right, and so it goes in a circle.
They need houses.
Yeah.
We have a housing shortage. We're going to bring in more people to help build the houses.
Then they need the houses. Then they need the health services. So the thing is, if we had a competent government with a bit of vision, like we did after World War II. Like World War II was one of the greatest periods of growth in the Australian economy, and
absolutely,
it took government leadership. But private sector did their bit as well. And if that was the case, I don't think we'd have all of this this being such a big issue. The second thing I just wanted to touch on with the skills crisis is, when I was at council, I used to be a design engineer, and I had some young team, and they were pushing. We need more engineers in design. Like the engineers actually really just supervising the job. It's actually the drafts people that are working on the computers that are actually producing the drawings. So council had a bit of a position where everyone has to be degreed qualified engineer. We need more engineers. And I was like, no, what we need is cadets, because designers get paid pretty well for what they do, because there's a bit of a shortage of them.
Yeah.
And it would have, I figured out, and a few of us in the team, we all worked together for it, that it was going to be cheaper for council but serve its long-term needs if we just got cadets straight out of school and then helped them to get their drafting degrees, So I think the cadetship programs in the government have really gone by the wayside. And I think what's happening there is we get an overqualified, degree-qualified people, but we need to also focus on training on the job. That's not only governments, but that's also the private sector's fallen down on that. So yes, and we need the intakes of the immigrants as well. So we need to get the whole picture right. But I think there's a lot of Australians that aren't properly utilised in the economy as well. And I think a lot of these skills shortages are quite manufactured. Like, I just think we're doing too many things that aren't really productive, I think.
Yeah, it's definitely a good point. And a couple of years ago, we had a really fruitful collaboration with some retired TAFE
I saw that one,
engineering teachers here in New South Wales, and they told me the story about the takedown of the TAFE skills training system, right?
Well,
they're paying the consequences.
Now they're sort of giving lip service to TAFE's really important, and I think there's some good things the government's doing. We can probably support, like free TAFE. Albanese's made that a big thing. So there's still some things they're doing, but it's just they are recognising it, and there's some promising things, but the whole picture's not pulled together.
And unfortunately, we made a hole in the process that we've got to repair now.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's talk about infrastructure though, because you're a man of big ideas. Tell us about your ideas for the country, and also though, tell us how they can be prioritised and depoliticised. Yeah.
Okay, so probably the biggest national project that's currently on the books, with the potential to revolutionise the economic benefit and productivity, it's got to be Inland Rail.
Yeah.
But we've got a candidate down in Riverina. Let's just say that
just explain the two. There's problems at both ends of Inland. Just what is the Inland Rail project? Start from the basics.
So the Inland Rail project is an inland freight system. It moves the freight that goes up and down the east coast of Australia, connecting Brisbane to Melbourne. That's the current plan, and I'd have a plan to connect it somewhere else. It's massive for economic productivity because it can take thousands and thousands of trucks off the road onto rail. And now those trucks are on a lot of those truck drivers are doing really long shifts. Like trucking industry is not an easy industry.
No, it's tough.
It's very tough. They're doing big overnight hauls, 110 k's an hour. Overnights, quite often they're, You know, they've got the nodos going.
Yep.
And they're doing it on the same road network that everyone that's just travelling around.
Yep.
on
Learner
their little
drivers,
cars.
little old grandmothers. Yep.
Yeah. So there's it's a massive safety issue for starters. The second thing is those roads aren't always in the best condition. They're like not very well funded or maintained.
I drove the Newell Highway just a few years ago, mate, and it was all the way.
So big potholes, things like that, they can cause very serious accidents.
Sure.
And I've actually got a lot of friends in the trucking industry. Like, so from back in the Labor days, I've got like a lot of friends in the TW, which is a Transport Workers Union. And if it was a women's issue, I'm not meaning to bring gender into it.
It's an example.
But I'm just going to say, I think the highest number of workplace accidents in Australia is in the trucking industry.
Right.
And these are some absolutely brutal deaths that these people experience on the roads. Like, I think it's up to 500 truckies a year die on the roads. And like, so if we can get the freight onto rail, it has environmental benefits.
Mm-hmm.
It reduces the maintenance spending on the road network because it's the trucks that cause most of the damage. We can reduce workplace deaths.
Yep.
We can increase public safety. And also, if we get the rail charging right, we can talk about some of the issues with ARTC, but economically it's more productive, you know, because we got big long trains, and that replaces one of these 1,800 metre trains. I think it's 700 containers, so one train, 700 trucks.
Yeah,
the economic efficiency.
Yeah.
And then the truck jobs are still going to be there, but they're going to be the short haul distances. It means the truck drivers can be home to their family at night.
Life. Yep.
They don't have to be away for long stints. They can work from a home base and do delivery. So overall, it's massive productivity, it's safety, but it's also like trade. You know, like if moving materials to consumers more efficiently, that all of the prices of moving freight go on the cost of everything we buy at the supermarkets.
Sure.
So it reduces inflation, increases productivity. It means we can move more goods, we can trade more with other countries, which we need to be doing, and we need to be focusing on our region because that's where the growth is. Like, we've got a crazy situation where we're like desperate to beg Trump to cut his tariffs on us, but we've got
a massive market ahead, north of us.
The biggest and most prosperous country in the world right in our doorstep, and the region. Like, everyone in Europe and America wants to be here.
Yeah, they'll be dying to be us.
And we're like, can we get out of here? Yeah. Like, it's like, so we need to come to grips with geography, but inland rail is a big part of it. And also, my interest in inland rail is getting it to Gladstone.
So I want to stay on inland rail now because let's discuss the whole project, then get on to the other good ones. Because there are problems with it. We've already alluded to them. So just describe the problems both ends and how to solve them.
So basically the problem is the federal government really wanted this project. I think Barnaby Joyce was the minister, and I think it started it started with Everett Compton. It was a National Party project.
Yeah.
So, and this is probably hard to say, but as an ex-Labor person, I think Labor really just saw it as a national project. So they probably wouldn't...
As a National Party project, you mean? Yeah. And therefore...
And so they probably were never really on board with it.
Yeah, they didn't think about the national interest or whatever,
Now, the thing is, the way infrastructure works is the states are the doers and the feds are the funders.
Right.
So the feds on their own don't have the power to actually deliver these big projects. So I believe it's really important, it needs to happen. But the state government has to give the approvals. Where's the route go? You know, all of this stuff.
Yep.
And without them on board, and at the time it was a national coalition government, and it was a Labor state government in Queensland. There's problems down south, which I'm sure Richard's told you about, but in north, all of the problems are in Queensland. So when it crosses the border, it crosses the Condamine floodplain. Right. And it could not be the worst place to build a railway. It's prime agricultural land, 12 metre deep black soil.
Right.
So soil movement can be up to 1 metre.
Yeah.
Like, when you build a freight railway, it has to be 1% grade, straight line.
Right.
Like you're moving massive containers.
Yeah,
There's huge amount of diesel power on the locomotive,
Yeah.
and you're building it across country that can shift 10 meters after a flood,
No
or
good.
it can drop 5 meters. So that's a disaster.
Yeah.
And then Toowoomba's been very influential because National Party again. Nationals wanted a big showcase, Toowoomba to be a big part of it. So that drags it across the floodplain, but it also means to get down to Brisbane, which is their goal, which I don't think will ever happen. But their goal is to get it down to Brisbane, which then means you've got to get from Toowoomba down the Toowoomba Range, which is a 7-kilometre tunnel that's about 3 kilometres deep, adds about $8 or $10 billion to the cost, unnecessarily, mind you.
Right.
There's other alternatives. Then, when you get to the bottom of the Toowoomba Range, you've got to go through the Lockyer Valley and destroy another 60
land.
k's of our most productive agricultural land,
Yep.
terrible ground conditions to build rail on. And then you've got to cut all the way back down to Bromwellton and come back up. So it's just...
To the Acacia Ridge problem that you talked about
And then when
already.
you get to Acacia Ridge,
Yeah.
there is a rail under the port, but with the Cross River Rail, there's going to be too many trains on that line. So it's stuck there, you unload... So you get it all the way to Acacia Ridge just to unload a flurry of trucks onto my suburb.
Yeah.
That's a disaster.
Now, just before we go into the solution, at the southern end, in Wagga Wagga, which is what Richard Foley would say, is he's pushing for the rail to go around the city instead of through the city.
Yeah,
right.
a bypass.
A bypass, so it has for not dissimilar reasons. But anyway, what's the solution to your end of it?
Okay, so the solution is send it straight up to Gladstone. So another problem. So in the Inland Rail Inquiry, I actually got a chance to be one of the people that presents at the inquiry. It was a bit of an interesting experience. It's a bit out of my normal wheelhouse, but it was great. So Senator Glenn Sterl, who I've introduced to you guys, and I understand you guys have worked with him on Iron Boomerang.
Yeah, on Boomerang. Yep.
He's a great old-fashioned Labor guy.
Yeah.
He's a truck driver himself.
That's right. Yep.
And he goes, "Oh, you've got a few letters behind your name. Why don't you come in and speak?" You know, I took him for a tour around Acacia Ridge.
Right. Okay.
Went out to the port, and he could see the problem straight away. And so there's actually a proponent that is willing to fund what they call a missing link, which connects Bowen to, so I think it's Banana to Mowra.
Right.
And then that missing link's already got an EIS in place. It's funded at, it's about $1.7 billion.
What's an EIS?
Environmental Impact Statement.
Sorry, sorry.
Yeah. So it's a shovel-ready project.
Yeah.
Connect it from Mowra to Banana, gets it up into Gladstone.
And Gladstone's a better port, right?
Right, yeah. So I'll just touch on a bit going back to Glenn Sterl. So Glenn Sterl was involved in the Iron Boomerang Senate inquiry. He's involved in the Inland Rail one, but there was also an inquiry into the trucking industry. So people might not be aware of this, is we actually don't have any sovereign ownership of our major trading ports. So there's a bottleneck through the Port Botany, you got the Melbourne Port, Adelaide, Brisbane. They're all owned
They're all privatised.
They're privatised, and they're owned by foreign pension funds.
Right.
And it means that Australia has no control over that.
Right.
Okay, now what this came out in the trucking inquiry is that there are massive tariffs being charged to us, because the trucking companies, Glenn Sterl describes it as, you're on the wrong side of the barbed wire fence.
Right.
If you're on the side of the barbed wire fence where the port is, you've got an absolute monopoly, because you own the port of entry to the country. And it's not Australians that own the port of entry, it's foreign pension funds. Now, a lot of the trucking companies that are Australian owned have to pay massive container loading and unloading charges just to cross a piece of barbed wire. Right.
Which is effectively a tariff.
It's a tariff.
Yep.
And also, people might not be aware of this. I think when you add it up, from shipping costs that are all foreign controlled, with almost no Australian ownership.
Australian shipping?
We have no Australian shipping, which is a big thing I believe in. We need to get a shipping fleet.
Well, National Party leader John Anderson famously said in 1999, Australia is a shipper nation, not a shipping nation.
Now, what does that mean?
it means we don't have to have our own ships. We'll let all these foreigners do it for us.
And look, I bet he's out there at the moment saying the opposite.
Yeah.
I've always been for supporting shipping, you know.
Yep.
So that's just nonsense.
These are the people who dismantled our country, frankly.
They dismantled the Australian national line.
Yep.
Now, so what people don't realise is with all of this private ownership, our trucking industries are basically price takers. They have to take the price, and then they've got no choice but to pay these massive tariffs to these private companies, and all the profits go offshore. They're not taxed properly. If you add up the tariffs from the point of origin to the consumer, I think there's about 18 tariffs and unloading and charges and things like that. So I just want to put that in context.
Yeah.
Because I happen to have, through the Gladstone Senate inquiry, I got involved with a gentleman he's trying to get a privately funded but state ownership model for Gladstone Port. So it'd be that Mara, that shovel-ready project I talked about, and the port expansion would be privately funded. But the key with the Gladstone Port is it still remains in state ownership.
Right.
So even though it's a private port, they don't exercise these crippling monopoly powers.
Right.
And all of those crippling monopoly powers feed through to the prices and the inflation that every Australian is getting at the supermarket. So that's what the primary reason is. It's going to be cheaper to get it there for the first place. The route they've chosen to go through Toowoomba and down into Brisbane is just ridiculous. And so second reason is engineering-wise, it's much easier to get it straight up to Gladstone. Second, it's cheaper. But the third thing is we will have a major import-export port, the closest major import terminal to our Asian neighbours.
Yep.
That's still under state ownership. So that's why.
Which is a major selling point. No, thanks for explaining that.
Yeah.
You and I have talked a lot, but I just learned something then from that conversation.
It's hard to take in a lot sometimes.
No, of course. But it actually shows the viewer how qualified you are as a candidate.
Yeah, so the proponent of this project, just to fill that in, he's got reciprocal trade agreements with 4 Southeast Asian ports locked away.
Oh, yeah.
All we need is the political to come on board, and this is like a similar situation with Iron Boomerang, which we can touch on a bit. But he's got the agreements in place. I think Kwantong Port, there's 3 other Southeast Asian ports that through his project, he's negotiated tariff-free access to those ports. So from the origin port in South Asia, for our imports, but also for our exports, including the warehousing with the model he's got and the trucking and backfeeding our cities from the Western distributors, 1 tariff from origin to destination. You imagine the savings that we'll have in terms of inflation, and one of the big inhibitors to our producers getting their products to the market is they're paying all of these people along the way. Now, we're going to cut them out. Those farmers, our producers, even exporting the ores, with a single tariff like that, that's a game changer.
A lot of difference.
Yeah, it's a game changer.
100%. All right, tell us some more about some other infrastructure. We keep talking about Iron Boomerang.
Yeah. So, my interest in, I know Citizens Party has really pushed hard for Iron Boomerang. So I've, discussed with Shane, I took the time to put my own submission in because I just can't help myself, you know. But, so talking about that Gladstone Port, if you put Gladstone Port together and get that inland rail link and you build Iron Boomerang, the first thing about Iron Boomerang is one of the crippling things that add to the cost of construction in Australia is we import most of our steel now.
Yeah.
Like we've seen Whyalla go tits up. You can't let that happen. No. We got the best coke and coal in the world. We got the best iron ore.
It's crazy.
How the hell does Australia have a shortage of steel?
No, it's crazy.
And we don't, like as an engineer, we don't just have a shortage of steel. We have a shortage of concrete pipes.
Yep.
There were 2 manufacturers of concrete pipes. One went out of business, so we've only got 1 in Queensland. The water mains are all made in China now. Tyco used to be an Australian company. All the water mains were made in Australia. The fittings, bends, valves. Just a simple thing connecting a lot. You've got to import and wait for them to come in the port. Timber, forestry timbers, big shortage of that. And then the skills, obviously. So it's absolutely critical we make the steel. And then I saw an argument on Q&A the other night, Trump's going to put tariffs on, they talked, the New South Wales Treasurer, who seemed like a pretty impressive guy, seemed all right. He said, we're going to mandate the use of Australian steel on projects.
Procurement, yep.
We absolutely should be doing that. And I think Michael Stutch or whatever his name is, said, well, the problem is you do that, Australian steel's more expensive. If you do that, everyone's going to have to pay more. You got this project sitting here, Iron Boomerang.
Yeah.
We can be the cheapest producer of steel in the whole region. We can produce steel. China, they always talk about China floods the market with steel. We can make it here 15 to 20% cheaper.
Amazing.
It takes a bit of vision, it takes investment, it takes getting behind it. But why the hell wouldn't you do that? You'd flood our market. We got houses to build, we got cities to build.
We've got railway lines to build.
We've got railway lines to build. Well, now Whyalla was going to be secured because they were going to produce all the steel for the rails for Inland Rail. They got to stop mucking around with the green hydrogen steel. That's kind of crap. Let's use what we got. Use it well, make it modern and efficient. But if you can be the cheapest producer of steel, we always talk about how much we rely on our iron ore exports and they're possibly under threat. We could be exporting steel and making 3, 4, 5 times the money.
Exactly.
Reducing the cost of shipping. We're not shipping the dirt, we're shipping the
money's
slabs.
in the processed product, not in the raw material.
We're going to have an absolute glut of it in Australia. Cheap to build all the infrastructure we want. It's an absolute no-brainer. Yeah. But then the thing is, if you combine that with that Port of Gladstone and dual track a short section of the Queensland network, it completes a national ring rail. Iron Boomerang connects across to Adelaide to Darwin. You've got Perth, Southern Pacific. You've got the Inland Rail. Melbourne, Brisbane, Darwin, Alice Springs, Adelaide, Perth, Pilbara, Bowen Basin, Northwest Minerals Province are all linked together in a national rail. And not only is that good for trading and moving containers around, but defence. We're in this AUKUS deal and it's a crappy deal, and it's like infrastructure is linked to defence. Now, what could be better than a national rail network that connects all the defence bases? You can move your materials around. We disagree with AUKUS. The money's going in and it's not that we don't believe in national defence, but it's better done with a proper infrastructure plan.
Infrastructure and the industry that allows you to be able to manufacture the things you need to defend yourself is all intimately tied up in this kind of vision, because at the moment we had none of it.
The threats to security is, one, you don't supply your trade routes. We've got no Australian shipping. All of our major export ports are controlled by foreign multinationals that could become hostile at any time. We can't move things around efficiently. We've got badly invested in road and rail networks. We're subject to high tariffs. We're subject to inflation. That's a real defence policy there. Move the personnel and the things around. Lower inflation. That's supply chain efficiency. We need to couple it with the natural gas. One thing I want to mention is in Queensland, we opened up, I think it was about 2011 when they built the 3 export terminals on Gibson Island, just near Gladstone. Gas, and then Gladstone, that's right there. Imagine a powerhouse Gladstone would be. It's got the export terminals, it's got the biggest and most expandable port in Australia, state government ownership. You imagine what a boon that would be for the taxpayer. But we've got one of the biggest gas export terminals in the world, and it's literally coming out of the ground. You drive out to out west and they've got flares. It's just burning because there's too much of it, so they're burning it off.
You're in Victoria now, mate. Yeah. We're the state that's going to have a shortage of gas in a few months.
I was just going to say, and now in Victoria and New South Wales, we're building import terminals. We pay $20-something a gigajoule for natural gas. We're selling it for about $4.
Yeah.
I mean, we're mugs, aren't we?
We are.
Yeah.
That's
part of the picture as well.
This is the corruption Andy Schmulo talks about.
Yeah, and that's it. It's not an accident.
No.
It's not an accident.
No.
You can only just look at the path from politician to gas lobbyist, or, Andrew Robb going onto the Port of Landbridge, sells off the Port of Darwin,
We have a revolving door between government and these corporations that they're supposed to have been regulating. Instead, they go and join them.
Exactly.
Right? And across all sectors, you're starting with the banks, the defence industry now is a big one,
Yep.
et cetera, et cetera. No, this is where, look, Max, you've demonstrated today, you've got the ideas and the vision to be we were talking about leadership, to be a leader of Australia. This is the whole bread and butter, if you want, of the Citizen Party. This is what we need in there. But what we also bring is the cut through, where we're not going to tolerate the corrupt obstacles that keep the status quo.
Yeah,
right?
well, that was one of the things that attracted me in the first place. Is okay, let's talk about Trump's tariffs for a thing. What's the narrative in Australia? Albo didn't beg hard enough.
Yeah.
There's been a round one of Trump tariffs.
Yeah.
Don't think I'm breaking any news here. There's going to be a round two. Round one was pretty minor. Round two threatens pharmaceuticals. It goes much deeper into the economy. Like the last statement, because we're going to finish in, I would just say, you look at the major parties, what's their response to this? Where's the plan?
Yeah, none.
There isn't one. The plan is, let's see if we can be really nice to him. Let's suck up. There must be something we can do. He'll change his mind. It's like, you know, like when you might break off with your girlfriend or something like that.
Yeah.
You're never going to get anywhere begging to get them back.
No.
You've got to make yourself better.
Yeah.
Right? So,
good point. You've got to make yourself better.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Australians really need to be asking themselves at this election, what is the plan? Because these things are going to happen and we've got no control on it.
Yep.
But we're talking here, and I think we're the only party that is talking about a real plan.
A self-driving, self-sufficient economic vision for Australia that means we're not going to be buffeted by these trade winds and those sorts of things.
That's the absolute best thing we can do. And this is not it's a threat. Let's not get it wrong, but it's an opportunity. We've been putting this stuff aside for so many years. Like, we can actually use this opportunity to get back to a model that works. We've got a model that doesn't work yet.
Well, Max, on that note, thank you very much. Viewer, especially residents of Morton, you've heard the man yourself now. I think most of you should agree that he's definitely a qualified candidate for this election. This is the sort of change that you have the opportunity to vote for in the 2025 federal election. So thanks for tuning into this excellent episode of Citizens Insight, and keep watching our YouTube channel. You'll see more coming up. Thanks, Max.
Thanks, Robbie. Thank you.